For 7 years, the Alpha King never touched her, until one night he finally asked to claim his mate.
7 winters came and went, burying her youth beneath the unforgiving stone of Ethelgard Castle. 7 years a queen in name, an outcast in reality, untouched by her Alpha King, until midnight struck on the blood moon, bringing a desperate knock to her chamber door and a terrifying demand. Rain lashed against the leaded glass windows of the great hall, a relentless drumbeat that matched the tense atmosphere of the solstice feast. Genevieve of House Ashford sat at the far edge of the high table, a position that perfectly mirrored her standing in the Iron Fang pack. She was the Alpha Queen, adorned in midnight blue velvet and heavy silver chains of office, yet she might as well have been a ghost. Seated 5 chairs away, surrounded by his boisterous generals and fawning court ladies, was King Desmond. He was a terrifying figure of a man, built like a fortress of muscle and scarred flesh, with eyes the color of forged steel. For 7 years, those eyes had looked everywhere but at her. Their marriage had been a brutal necessity. House Ashford controlled the northern mountain passes, and the Iron Fang pack needed those routes to secure the continent of Ethelgard against the wild rogue factions. A treaty was signed in blood, vows were exchanged in the ancient tongue, and Genevieve was brought to the capital. The realm expected a mating ceremony to seal the pact. Instead, on their wedding night, Desmond had escorted her to the East Tower, turned on his heel without a single word, and locked the door. He never came back. In the real world of court politics, an untouched mate is a walking target. The whispers began within a fortnight. By the 2nd year, the lords and ladies of the court openly mocked her. Lady Beatrice, the cunning daughter of the Master of Coin, made a sport of accidentally spilling wine on Genevieve's hemlines or sitting just a fraction too close to the king. Lord Reginald, the king's uncle, openly suggested annulment at every council meeting. Genevieve endured it all with a spine made of iron and a face carved of marble. She did not weep. Tears were a luxury a hostage could not afford. Instead, she learned, while the court thought she was languishing in her tower, sewing tapestries and crying over her rejected wolf, Genevieve was mapping the castle. She befriended the scullery maids, the stable boys, and the silent archivists in the royal library. She discovered that Maester Julian, the chief healer, was skimming from the apothecary funds to pay off gambling debts. She learned that the supposedly impenetrable southern wall had a structural flaw that the guards habitually ignored. More importantly, she studied the ancient texts of werewolf lore that Desmond's ancestors had locked away. She knew things about the Iron Fang lineage that Desmond himself likely did not. As the feast raged on, Genevieve delicately cut into a roasted game bird, her keen ears filtering through the din of the hall. She noticed a shift in the air. A messenger, soaked to the bone and breathless, burst through the heavy oak doors. The music halted. The man rushed directly to Desmond, whispering frantically in the king's ear. Genevieve watched Desmond's jaw tighten. The steel in his eyes shattered into something she had never seen before, raw, unadulterated panic. He stood abruptly, his massive chair scraping violently against the flagstones. His gaze swept the room, entirely bypassing Lady Beatrice, ignoring his generals, and finally slamming directly into Genevieve. The sheer force of his stare felt like a physical blow. The wolf inside her, dormant and depressed for 7 years, suddenly clawed at her ribs, howling in recognition. "Clear the hall!" Desmond ordered, his voice a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. "All of you! Out!" Within minutes, the vast room was empty, leaving only the dying embers in the hearth and the heavy silence between the Alpha and his untouched mate. Desmond did not approach her. He simply turned and vanished through the door leading to his private chambers. Genevieve stood slowly, smoothing her skirts. She retreated to her east tower, expecting the night to pass like the thousands of nights before it in cold solitude. She dismissed her handmaiden, unlaced her velvet gown, and slipped into a simple linen nightshift. Then came the knock. It was not the polite tap of a servant. It was 3 heavy, desperate strikes. Genevieve opened the door to find Captain Gideon, the commander of the Kingsguard, standing in the dimly lit corridor. His usually stoic face was pale, his hand resting anxiously on the pommel of his broadsword. "My queen," Gideon said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "the king commands your presence." In his chambers. Now, Genevieve's heart slammed against her ribs. In 7 years, she had never been allowed near the king's private wing. "Is there an emergency, Captain? It is not my place to say. Your Grace. Please. We must hurry." Wrapping a thick fur mantle over her night shift, Genevieve followed the captain through the labyrinthine corridors of Ethelgard. The castle was eerily quiet, the shadows dancing ominously against the damp stone walls. When they reached the heavy mahogany doors of the Alpha's suite, Gideon stepped aside, refusing to meet her eyes. Genevieve took a steadying breath, pushed the heavy iron latch, and stepped inside. The king's bedchamber was plunged in near darkness, illuminated only by a single candelabra on a heavy oak desk. The air was thick with the scent of pine, blood, and the overwhelming, intoxicating musk of a distressed alpha. Desmond was pacing like a caged beast. He had stripped off his formal tunic, leaving him in loose linen trousers and a shirt unlaced at the collar. When the door clicked shut behind her, he froze, whipping around to face her. For the first time in 7 years, there were no courtiers to perform for. There were no masks. "Genevieve," he breathed, her name sounding foreign and ragged on his tongue. She stood tall by the door, refusing to shrink under his intense gaze. "You summoned me, my king." He flinched at the formal title. Closing the distance between them with predatory speed, he stopped just inches away. The sheer heat radiating from his large frame made her skin prickle. He was trembling. Desmond, the ruthless warlord who had conquered 3 rebel provinces, was shaking. "I have wronged you," he said, his voice cracking. It was not a royal decree, it was a confession. "For 7 years, I have confined you to a life of misery. I have let the court mock you. I have starved your wolf of the bond she was promised." Genevieve's chin tilted up. "You brought me here in the dead of night to offer an apology. 7 years too late?" Her voice was steady, betraying none of the absolute shock coursing through her veins. "If you finally intend to annul the union, just hand me the parchment. I will sign it and return to the northern mountains." "No!" The roar ripped from his throat, echoing off the stone walls. His hands darted out, grasping her upper arms. The contact was electric. It was the first time he had ever touched her bare skin. Sparks of pure, agonizing mate magic exploded across her flesh, making both of them gasp. Desmond quickly released her, stepping back as if burned, running a hand through his dark hair. "No," he repeated, softer this time. "I cannot let you go. I never wanted to let you go. You have no idea what it has cost me to stay away from you." "Then why did you?" she demanded, the dam of her suppressed anger finally showing a crack. "Why lock me away? Why let Lady Beatrice parade around as if she were the queen in all but name?" Desmond turned away, leaning heavily against his desk. "Because if I had claimed you, if I had shown the realm that you were my heart and my weakness, you would have been dead before our first anniversary." Genevieve frowned, the pieces of the puzzle shifting in her mind. "What are you talking about?" "My uncle, Lord Reginald," Desmond rasped, looking at the stone floor. "He did not orchestrate the treaty with your family to secure peace. He did it to bankrupt my military forces and consolidate his own power in the south. On our wedding day, I intercepted a letter meant for him. It detailed an assassination plot against you. The plan was simple: let me claim you, let the mate bond fully form, and then murder you." Genevieve felt the blood drain from her face. Every wolf knew that if a fully bonded mate was killed, the surviving partner would either go entirely mad or die of a broken heart within weeks. "If they killed you after the bond was sealed," Desmond continued, his voice hollow, "I would have been destroyed. Reginald would step in to take the throne as the grieving uncle. The only way to save your life, and my kingdom, was to convince him that I despised you, that our mating was purely political, a sham. I had to make him believe that your death would not affect me." He looked up, his steel eyes swimming with unshed emotion. I let Beatrice cling to me because she is a known spy for Reginald. I fed her false information. I let the court treat you like a ghost so that Reginald would view you as a useless pawn, not a threat. I locked you in the East Tower because it is the only sector of the castle guarded by men loyal only to me. Genevieve's mind raced. 7 years of humiliation. 7 years of freezing loneliness. All of it was a meticulously crafted stage play to keep her breathing. The resentment she had harbored warred fiercely with the sudden, overwhelming realization of his sacrifice. "If this is true," she whispered, stepping closer to him, "why break the silence now? Why summon me tonight?" Desmond's expression hardened into something desperate and terrifying. He stripped off his shirt, turning his back to her. Genevieve gasped, running up the left side of his spine, branching out over his ribs like a grotesque, blackened spiderweb, were veins of dark, rotting magic. It wasn't a physical wound. It was a curse mark. "Because I am out of time," Desmond said, turning back to face her. Reginald grew tired of waiting for me to falter. 3 months ago, he slipped a slow-acting hex into my wine. A shadow bane. It is slowly suffocating my wolf, rotting me from the inside out. He stepped into her personal space again, looking down at her with a vulnerability that broke her heart. "Tomorrow morning, Reginald plans to challenge me for the alpha title in the sparring ring. He knows I am weakened. He knows my wolf cannot rise to meet the challenge. If I decline, I forfeit the crown, and he slaughters us both. If I fight, he kills me in front of the court, takes the throne, and slaughters you. There has to be a cure," Genevieve said, her mind instantly flashing to the hundreds of medical texts she had secretly studied. "Maester Julian. Julian is on Reginald's payroll," Desmond interrupted bitterly. "I have no allies left. None except you. What can I do? I am no warrior." Desmond reached out, his large, calloused hand gently cupping her jaw. The touch sent a cascade of warmth through her shivering body. The ancient texts of Ethelgard speak of the true mate bond, not just the political claiming, but the soul-deep bite of 2 alpha bloodlines merging. The texts say that the completion of a pure bond triggers a surge of regenerative magic capable of burning out dark curses. He swallowed hard, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Genevieve, my wolf is dying. The only thing that can shock it back to life, the only thing that can purge this hex from my blood, is the true bond." He dropped to his knees before her, a king kneeling in the dust. He took her small hands in his massive ones, pressing his forehead against her knuckles. "I am asking you to save my life, and in doing so, doom yourself to be chained to me forever. I am asking to claim my mate." Finally, Genevieve stared down at the fearsome Alpha King, the man who had been her warden and, she now realized, her protector. The twist of fate was a bitter irony. He had ignored her to save her, and now he had to claim her to save himself. But Genevieve was not the naive northern girl who had arrived at the castle 7 years ago. She had spent those years sharpening her mind into a deadly weapon. "Get up, Desmond," she commanded softly. He looked up, surprised by the authority in her tone. Slowly, he rose to his feet. "I will let you claim me," Genevieve said, her voice turning to ice. "I will give you the bite, and I will awaken your wolf so you can tear your uncle's throat out tomorrow." Desmond let out a ragged breath of relief, stepping forward to take her in his arms. "But," Genevieve held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks, "there are conditions. If I do this, I am no longer the ghost of the East Tower. I am no longer your secret to protect. When you walk out of that sparring ring tomorrow, coated in Reginald's blood, you will stand before the pack and declare me your equal in all things. You will banish Lady Beatrice, and you will execute Maester Julian for his treason." Desmond stared at her, wide-eyed, realizing for the first time that while he had been playing the Game of Thrones, his neglected queen had been mastering it. A slow, feral grin spread across the Alpha King's face, his eyes flashing with the sudden golden light of his dormant wolf stirring. "You," he whispered reverently, are far more dangerous than I ever realized. You have no idea, Genevieve replied, tilting her head to expose the pale column of her neck. Now, claim your mate, Alpha. The air in the bedchamber grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and impending lightning. Desmond stepped forward, his massive frame dwarfing Genevieve, yet it was she who held the absolute command of the room. He did not grab her with the feral desperation he had shown moments before. Instead, his hands were agonizingly gentle as they swept her heavy hair to one side. I do not deserve this grace, Desmond murmured, his breath ghosting over her collarbone. I do not deserve you. We will argue about your merits tomorrow, my king, Genevieve replied, her voice remarkably steady despite the violent trembling of her own long-suppressed wolf. Tonight, you survive. Do it. Desmond's eyes bled from forged steel to a brilliant, terrifying gold. His jaw shifted, the distinct sound of bone popping and realigning echoing in the quiet chamber as his alpha fangs descended. He pressed a kiss to the pulse point, fluttering frantically at the base of her throat, a gesture of pure, raw devotion that shattered the last of her resentment before he sank his teeth into the soft, pale flesh of her mating gland. The pain was a brilliant, blinding flash of white heat, instantly eclipsed by an explosion of ancient magic. Genevieve threw her head back, a breathless gasp tearing from her lips. It was as if a dam had burst within her soul. For 7 years, her inner wolf had been a starved, pacing creature, locked away in the dark. Now, it roared to life, surging forward to meet the magnificent, albeit wounded, spirit of the Alpha King. She felt the heavy, suffocating weight of his burden, the bitter taste of the shadowbane rotting his veins, and the agonizing loneliness he had endured to keep her breathing. Through the bond, she saw his memories. Desmond, intercepting Lord Reginald's coded letters from a mercenary named Bartholomew Croft. Desmond standing outside the East Tower in the freezing rain, his hand pressed against the heavy oak door, listening to her breathe while forbidding himself from entering. Desmond enduring the toxic company of Lady Beatrice, just to keep the spies looking the wrong way. The truth of his sacrifice crashed over her like a tidal wave. My turn, Genevieve rasped, her own eyes flaring with the icy blue light of the northern Ashford wolves. She gripped his broad shoulders, pulling him down to her level, and sank her fangs into the thick muscle of his neck. The moment their blood mingled, the room was bathed in a blinding, ethereal light. The true mate bond, a ritual rarely completed in the modern age of political marriages, ignited. Genevieve felt the dark, oily presence of the Shadowbane hex fighting back. It lashed out, a cold and venomous entity trying to freeze her heart. But the Ashford bloodline was ancient, born of the harshest winters. She funneled every ounce of her willpower, every shred of her newly awakened strength, into Desmond. Desmond threw his head back and roared, a sound that shook the very foundations of Ethelgard Castle. The blackened, spiderweb veins that marred his spine began to physically burn. He collapsed to his knees, taking Genevieve down with him. They held onto each other on the cold stone floor, completely consumed by the violent purging of the curse. Black ichor seeped from his pores, immediately vaporizing into harmless ash as the golden light of the mate bond cauterized the dark magic out of his system. For hours, they lay tangled together, the king and his discarded queen, fighting a war within his veins. Slowly, the tremors ceased. The ragged, wet sound of Desmond's breathing smoothed out into the deep, powerful rhythm of a healthy alpha. When dawn finally broke, casting pale rays of morning light through the leaded glass, Desmond opened his eyes. The exhaustion was gone. The sickly pallor that had haunted his features for months was replaced by a vibrant, terrifying vitality. He looked down at Genevieve, who was resting against his chest, her fingers tracing the now flawless, unscarred skin of his back. "It is gone," he whispered, awe lacing his deep voice. He flexed his hands, the terrifying strength of his wolf fully restored and thrumming just beneath his skin. The hex is completely gone. Genevieve sat up, pulling her fur mantle tighter around her shoulders. She looked different. The pale, ghost-like girl of the East Tower had vanished. In her place sat a woman radiating raw, palpable authority. The mate mark on her neck throbbed with a dull ache, a permanent brand of her power and her tether to the king. "Then your wolf is awake," Genevieve said, her icy blue eyes meeting his golden ones. "He is," Desmond growled, a feral, possessive rumble vibrating in his chest. He reached out, his knuckles brushing her cheek, and he is absolutely captivated by his queen. Genevieve did not blush. She offered him a razor-sharp smile. "Good. Because the sun is up, Desmond. Lord Reginald is waiting in the sparring ring, and the court is expecting a slaughter. It is time we gave them one." Desmond stood, pulling her up with him. He walked over to a heavy iron-bound chest at the foot of his bed, throwing it open. Inside, resting on a bed of crimson velvet, was a crown. It was not the delicate silver chain of office Genevieve had worn to the feasts. It was the ancient crown of the Northern Fangs, forged of black iron and embedded with winter sapphires. Desmond picked it up and turned to her. "They thought you were a pawn. Today, they learn you are the board." He placed the heavy iron crown upon her head. "Are you ready, my queen? Lead the way, my alpha." Dawn broke over the brutalist granite amphitheater of Ethelgard, casting long, bloody shadows across the frost-covered ground. Snow drifted softly over the viewing stands, where the entirety of the Iron Fang court huddled in breathless, morbid anticipation. Lord Reginald stood at the dead center of the sparring ring. Stripped to the waist, the aging but heavily muscled traitor exuded arrogant, terrifying confidence. Beside the arena gates, Lady Beatrice smirked from beneath her heavy white fox furs, whispering conspiratorially to a profusely sweating Maester Julian. They were entirely convinced the Alpha King would arrive crawling, ravaged from the inside out by the Shadowbane hex. "Sunlight has crested the southern watchtower," Reginald bellowed, his voice echoing off the ancient stone, laced with a triumphant sneer. "If my nephew, the so-called Alpha King, fails to answer my challenge, he forfeits the throne by the ancient laws of our kind." Silence answered him. Then, the heavy iron portcullis shrieked upward with a deafening grind. The royal heralds did not sound their horns. They did not need to. The suffocating, pure predatory aura that flooded the courtyard announced the king perfectly. Desmond strode into the arena. He was not stumbling, nor was he pale. He moved with the terrifying, fluid grace of an apex predator at the absolute height of its power. Bare-chested in the freezing air, his skin was flawless, completely purged of the blackened, rotting veins that had plagued him for months. But the collective gasp that rippled through the nobility, prompting even the famously stoic Duke Alistair Kensington to drop his silver goblet in shock, was not for the miraculously healed king. Walking flawlessly in step beside the Alpha was Genevieve. Clad in structured black leather and dark northern wool, she looked nothing like the fragile, neglected ghost they had mocked for 7 years. Upon her head rested the ancient, black iron crown of the Northern Fangs. Even more devastating was her neck. Displayed proudly for the entire court to witness was a freshly bitten, raw mate mark, radiating pure, untamed alpha magic. Reginald's arrogant sneer vanished entirely. His meticulously plotted treason shattered before his very eyes. Desmond paused at the edge of the ring, turning to face Genevieve. He bowed his head to her in a shocking, very public display of submission that sent murmurs ripping through the viewing stands. She nodded once, gracefully ascending the steps to the obsidian throne overlooking the sand. Only then did Desmond vault the stone wall, landing heavily in the center of the ring. "You challenged me for my crown, uncle," Desmond growled, his voice a lethal, vibrating baritone. "I am here." Panic flared wildly in Reginald's eyes. He forced his body to shift, his bones snapping loudly as he transformed into a hulking, gray lichen beast. He lunged instantly. A desperate, roaring blur of teeth and claws. Desmond did not fully shift. Fueled by the true mate bond and driven by 7 years of fiercely suppressed rage, his eyes burned like miniature golden suns. He simply vanished from Reginald's path, moving faster than the eye could track, reappearing to drive a bone-shattering blow directly into the beast's ribs. The sickening crack silenced the courtyard. Desmond parried a frantic, snapping bite, seized the scruff of Reginald's neck, and slammed the massive wolf into the granite floor with earth-shaking force. With one brutal, sickening twist, Desmond snapped the traitor's neck. The massive wolf went limp, shifting back into Reginald's lifeless human form. Desmond wiped the blood from his claws, turning his burning golden gaze to the terrified lords. "Does anyone else wish to challenge my claim?" Captain Gideon immediately dropped to one knee in the snow, followed swiftly by Duke Kensington and the rest of the trembling court. "My queen," Desmond said, gesturing to the obsidian throne. "The floor is yours." Genevieve stood slowly, her icy blue eyes locking onto the remaining conspirators. "Captain Gideon, seize Maester Julian and Lady Beatrice." She tossed a heavy, leather-bound ledger into the frosted sand at their feet. "I spent 7 years locked in the East Tower reading. This ledger contains every receipt of Shadowbane purchased by Julian on the eastern black markets, paid for by Reginald, and delivered directly to the king's cupbearer by Beatrice." "This is a lie!" Beatrice shrieked, struggling against the guards. "You are an accessory to attempted regicide," Genevieve stated coldly, her voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "Maester Julian will hang before sundown. Lady Beatrice, you are stripped of your name and banished to the rogue lands. If you ever return, the wolves will feast." As the guards dragged the sobbing, ruined traitors away, Genevieve stepped down into the ring to take Desmond's bloodied hand. "The Iron Fang pack is no longer divided," she proclaimed to the kneeling nobility. "The king and queen stand as one, and we will mercilessly destroy anyone who threatens our peace." Genevieve and Desmond ruled Ethelgard not as captor and captive, but as equals forged in fire. The ghost of the East Tower became the realm's most formidable Alpha Queen, her mind as sharp as her mate's claws. Their bond, born from a desperate gamble, healed a broken kingdom. They proved that true power lies not in deception, but in the unbreakable trust between a wolf and his chosen mate.
Hi, my name is King's Obsession Concord, the owner and manager of King's Obsession Concord. After watching the video, for 7 years the Alpha King never touched her, until one night he finally asked to claim his mate. I really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the tension between patience, distance, and unspoken emotions. 7 years is a long time to hold back feelings, and I think that's what makes this story feel so emotional. Sometimes people carry fears, doubts, or responsibilities that stop them from saying what's truly in their hearts, even when the connection is already there. Do you think the Alpha King was protecting her by keeping his distance, or was he afraid of what claiming her would change? And if someone waited that long to finally open up to you, would it make the moment more meaningful or more painful? Stories like this remind us that honest communication matters, even when it feels difficult or risky. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional Alpha King stories filled with slow burn tension, loyalty, and deep connections, feel free to like and subscribe only if you'd like to see more.